Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about JASMY and how I think it could be a game changer for decentralized AI. Now, let's go on ahead and dive right in. So to start, let's look at the chart and see kind of how things are looking from a technical perspective. So as you can see here, we've got a pretty big, I would say like a support and resistance zone. As we can see, we've seen, a lot of bounces off the bottom here, as well as a lot of bounces both off of the top as well as into the top and coming back down. So this kind of whole zone here between like 1.7 and like 1.9 or 2 cents all seems to be kind of like a pretty strong zone of both support and resistance. What we can also see is there's been kind of a general trend down, which almost looks like a descending wedge. So at this point, it does look like we're getting close to where we should be seeing this either break out of the wedge or maybe even break down, in through this support zone. Kind of where we're at as far as the technical perspective, it looks like, JASMY could be poised to see some big moves soon. And we'll go into in a second here why I think they actually could be some pretty big moves to the upside. So moving on, what I wanted to talk about is something that currently exists in the Web 2 world and how Web 3 I actually think is coming up with a lot of good solutions to improve on and make this solution better. So what we have going on in the Web 2 world right now is something called data brokers. And what data brokers do is they essentially harvest all of our personal information and then go and sell it to large companies for a profit. Now, obviously, if you're anything like me, I haven't seen a check for any of this information of mine that's being sold off. And that's because essentially they, in my mind, kind of steal it. But, I think they would say they scrape it or obtain it through other methods. But, the way I look at it is, if it's my information, I own it, right? But at least in the Web 2 world, that is not at all the case. So what we can see here is that the data broker industry is actually a massive industry. When at the time this was posted, it was about 200 billion. And from some of the things I've read, there's estimates that we should be seeing this industry being about a $450 billion industry by 2028. We can see, some people are paying, a decent bit of money just for, various pieces of data about you. And, overall, if one company is willing to pay $89 for your email address, how many companies are these data brokers making $89 on your email address for? That, this could turn out to be a pretty substantial amount of money. And one of the things that's even crazier to me about this is it looks like, at least with this particular, sales pitch that they're doing, they actually want you to pay to protect your data, which just seems completely insane to me. So one thing that JASMY does, and we'll get into this here in a second, is they actually allow you to keep your own private data in what they call a private data locker. And then at that point, what these companies can do is they can actually go to JASMY and essentially look for data that kind of fits the criteria that they're wanting to see. And then JASMY will actually ask you if you would like to provide that data for a certain amount of money, and you can either accept or decline that offer, which allows you to have control over your personal data and who it goes to, as well as also benefit off of, the value that these companies are extracting from this type of information, rather than these data brokers, which is as it is currently. So I also think this impacts AI as well, because what we're seeing right now is a lot of the big developments in AI are coming from centralized companies, right? We've got, ChatGPT, we've got Google's version, we've got Facebook's version, we've got Twitter's version. But all of these companies are obviously massive behemoths that have access. In a lot of cases, they're the ones who actually are generating a lot of this data. And so they're kind of keeping a monopoly on this data in a sense. And so one thing that's happening and that I think blockchain will enable as well is decentralized AI. And decentralized AI I think could be quite important, because having a game-changing AI in the hands of one single party, whether that's a government or a business or perhaps even a small group of people unaffiliated with any larger organization, that could create some pretty scary outcomes depending on who has control and what their intentions are with that type of power. So with decentralized AI, this is something that we can see where it allows people to essentially see the development in this space open source. It also allows the data that's being contributed into these models to be both benefiting the user or the owner of that data, but it also allows us to get a better sense of what type of data is going into, what's the sample size, who's it from, to make sure that we can detect and maybe adjust for any biases that might be going into this type of data. So what we can see here in this article, it's a Medium article discussing decentralized AI. We can see that the decentralized networks essentially give people access to distributed power. One of the reasons that AI is so centralized right now is because it's very, very expensive to create a high quality model. Not only do you need a whole bunch of data, which as we saw in the last article can be very, very expensive, but you also need a ton of computing power to develop these models. Where with decentralized networks, you now can draw on this computing power that other people may have without needing to pay an obscene amount of money to go and buy it all. The other thing, same thing, you don't need to go through data brokers or anything. You can actually go to real people who have their own data already contributed to the network and pull the data from there. So this allows for both the owners of their data to benefit from it, but it also allows for smaller parties to contribute to the development of AI rather than keeping this something that is essentially only able to be used by large governments or large businesses or people that have a lot of resources to develop this type of technology. The other thing that we can see as well is we have enhanced data privacy and security, because if all of this information is being kept in your private data locker, you have control over what type of information goes out, if it keeps you anonymous to some degree, that type of stuff, so you can have more control over where your information is going. The other thing that these guys are talking about is it stops data monetization. I would kind of disagree with that. I wouldn't say that it stops data monetization, but I would say it moves data monetization back into the hands of the people who actually own the data. So moving on, let's look at JASMY's ecosystem and kind of how it works. And then from there, we can kind of discuss, what this could mean for the JASMY coin and maybe some, potential reasonable price predictions. So what we can see here is that, you are the end user, right? Or in this case, you're the data generator, right? And so you now essentially can contribute this data that you're generating into your personal data locker. Now, at this point, there's a merchant that can contact the JASMY network and then look for essentially certain types of profiles that they would be wanting the data for, right? At that point, JASMY will then ask you if you are wanting to contribute your data, and also, how much they're wanting to pay, what type of data they're wanting, all of that type of stuff. You can then either accept or decline that request, at which point the data either, moves to them or not, and then at which point you actually receive some JASMY coin if you do decide to contribute your data, and the merchant would actually, pay you in the JASMY coin, while JASMY itself obviously would, collect a transaction fee for that. And then from there, you'd be able to use the JASMY coin to then, either cash out into some other, crypto that you're interested in, or just hang on to it. What this does is, if JASMY is the ecosystem that becomes widely used, the value of this coin goes up over time, because if merchants have to pay in the JASMY coin, then there's going to be a consistent buy pressure. And if more merchants are wanting to use the JASMY network to buy data, then there's going to be both a consistent but also increasing buy pressure on the JASMY coin, which would benefit both holders as well as users of the coin. The other thing about the JASMY network that is interesting is it is actually fully regulated by the Japanese government as well. It's listed on their their stock index, and it's got full approval from the Japanese equivalent of the SEC, which is really interesting because a lot of crypto companies are struggling to find guidance in the regulation, and so that's something that I think is really really good news for the JASMY ecosystem. So now that we kind of have a good sense about JASMY and what it is, let's go back to the JASMY chart. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a clean version of the chart here, but as I mentioned earlier, we can see that the market cap was about $1 billion. If we are going off of the assumption, of the previous piece of data, which is that data brokers, that industry is now a $200 billion industry, and it could be up to, $450 billion by 2026, 2028. One thing that's also not being considered here is that this doesn't include AI as well, right? If people are needing good, high quality data for the development of their AI models, that's going to put a massive onus on different, data brokers, JASMY-like ecosystems, things like that, to provide good quality data that people can train their models on. So currently, we're sitting at a $1 billion market cap, but the total market cap or the volume of this industry could, potentially by 2030 be hitting, $1 trillion if AI also plays a massive role into this, not only just other companies looking for good data to, work on advertising or things like that. So This is something to consider, in that, if JASMY is looking at even taking a fraction of that overall marketplace, let's say by 2028 it does hit that $450 billion market cap, and JASMY's taking a quarter of the total market, then we can see that JASMY would be well over $100 billion at that point, which would be 100x from here. So if JASMY can cement themselves as a big player within that market, JASMY could be poised to see some pretty large price appreciation over the next couple of years. The other thing that's interesting is there's no games being played with their coin, right? It's purely a mode of transaction within their network. There's no burn mechanisms or tokenomics or anything like that, which in my opinion is a good thing, because it prevents any sort of I guess unnecessary speculation going on within the market, even though obviously people will speculate. But ultimately there is a driver fundamentally for the coin to become more valuable, and that's ultimately, in my opinion, what we all should be looking for in the crypto ecosystem. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the information in this video. Please remember, nothing that I say is financial, tax, legal, accounting advice. This is for entertainment purposes only. Hopefully it helps you get a better understanding of the overall ecosystem, but you need to be doing your own research. Obviously you should not be going onto YouTube and using that as like your sole place for information gathering and investment advice. Take your time, make sure that you understand the project, make sure you understand where it could win, where it could lose, and ultimately